Welcome to Future Foodcast. I'm Pam Miller, your host. Today's episode is going to be very exciting. If you love to know about technology in the food space, we have an expert with us. Her name is Pankhuri Bansal. She is a blockchain expert with the UN, the United Nations, as well as an LTO advisor. Welcome to the show, Pankhuri.
Hello, Pamela. Thank you. Thanks for having me on Foodcast. I'm excited to be here and I look forward to having interesting discussions about the food industry within the supply chain.
Looking forward to your insights because you have quite a great background. Would you like to share with our audience before we get started a little bit about your background and then what you're doing?
Yeah, sure. So I have been in the technology space for about 8 years now. I started my career in the finance domain. So started with MSCI, working on ETFs, traditional financial industry. Then I went on to do my master's in the UK. I did my bachelor's at LSE, then did my master's at Warwick in economics and finance. And then after that, I went on to work with the United Nations in Bangkok, Asia Pacific, that is. So I was looking at a group of countries within Asia Pacific, and the project that I was working on was mainly to empower the SMEs that work in that region. And food was a major topic there, right? Because these are developing nations that we're talking about, and then food is their like main source of livelihood. They make their earnings from the agriculture sector. So part of my job was to see how technology can enhance the opportunities that they get in that region. And that's when I kind of stumbled upon blockchain as a technology 2015, 2016. I'd read a little about it, and then I realized this is the way how SMEs can be empowered. Blockchain is the way. So it just started out of curiosity, and based on that, like I discussed with some of the leaders in the space that how we can do it. So we kind of published a book around that within the UN at that point in time. And I think from there on, there has been no going back in terms of how I feel that, blockchain or even like other digital technologies can empower SMEs or different distributors or wholesalers or basically every stakeholder within the supply chain of food industry. So
Mm.
after that, I went on to work with a couple of other startups as well to gain some hands-on experience as to how blockchain or the digital assets can be used in different domains, so banking, finance, supply chain, worked with JP Morgan as well. So worked around some of the use cases within tokenization, the JPM coin, for example. And then after that, I started working more independently. So I started working with ISO, where I was creating blockchain standards for better interoperability of digital technologies. Like it's anyway a very complicated technology for people to understand. But for businesses to understand and implement, it takes a lot. So I was looking at how we can have different, DLT system interoperate with each other. So worked around standards in that domain. Again, did a very similar, been doing something very similar with the UN now, UNCE Pact, where one of the examples is we're trying to trace critical raw materials from different parts of the world, such as cobalt, for example, some of the raw minerals onto the blockchain. So in a nutshell, been in the industry for about 7, 8 years. Also did a master's in AI and ML in the middle from University of Texas, Austin, because in my head and in my understanding of the circular economy, I believe that AI, IoT, and blockchain kind of run hand in hand. So at this point, my work focuses a lot on how supply chains can be enhanced and integrated with existing digital technologies, and I work with like research institutions in the UK, publishing papers around circular economy and digital technologies. I have also published some papers with the UN on similar regard. So, and I also work with LTO as an advisor. They are a layer one blockchain, and they are also working on RWAs, which is real world assets. So they work on tokenizing, different parts of assets. And one of the use cases is that they're tokenizing land for farmers. So they're fractionalizing them and kind of empowering them to own a piece of land and earn some money on it. I know it was not a brief introduction, but just wanted to give you, some holistic background on what I've been doing in this space so far.
Yes, thank you, Pankhuri. There are several things that you mentioned there. I am just so excited to bring your information to our audience. And I'd like to back up a little bit because I know a lot of people, when they think blockchain, I'm so glad you highlighted all the different industries that you've worked in where blockchain can be used and is being used, because I think a lot of people, they hear blockchain and they think cryptocurrency, but the reality is that cryptocurrency requires blockchain, but blockchain does not require cryptocurrency. There are all these other applications that we are going to highlight. I mean, you highlighted in your background, and we're going to talk about the food industry. I wonder if you have any other way to explain the blockchain to somebody, since you've had to go into business, all different businesses, to explain to them how you explain it to them in, I would say, layman's terms, maybe for some of our audience who might not be as familiar with how that might work.
Yes, Pam, absolutely. So, how I describe blockchain is nothing but having an accounting ledger digitally, so when you maintain accounts in your spreadsheet or in a physical book, you're not doing that anymore physically, you're just doing that digitally. And instead of having access to it like just you as a person, when you're sitting in front of your spreadsheet, now this particular digital spreadsheet can be seen across various stakeholders in real time at the same time. So what happens is the ease of access, firstly. So all the stakeholders involved in a particular transaction can see that information at the same time. So it saves a lot of time and money, in terms of, okay, what information is available out there. And it's being fed into the system real time. So all the data that is being generated through different stakeholders, let's say, farmers recording about the health of the crops, or distributors about, an invoice, for example. I mean, things like that, or customers trying to see, how they can trace the origin of the products, for example. All of that is real time on the blockchain. Now, that information is accessible at real time at lower cost. And at the same time, the beauty of technology of the blockchain is that once the data is recorded on it, it's cryptographically hashed. What it means is that you cannot really alter that data, because there are different nodes sitting out there who are validating these transactions. So it's not like someone can just record that transaction and not provide any proof of it. So there's a proof of where that data is coming from, and once that proof is validated, that particular transaction is put on the blockchain. So it's incorruptible. It kind of reduces the leakages within the system. It kind of reduces the corruption that exists within the legacy systems. So that is the main advantage of having blockchain, or recording a transactions digitally,
Yeah.
and at the same time, it's lower cost. It reduces your time and effort to kind of manage different people at the same time. So yeah, in a nutshell, it's a digital ledger recording your transactions online instead of offline, is what I would say.
Exactly. So when you digitize things in that manner, so that's essentially the immutable chain of events. Here's what happened. Here's all the data about it. For example, you talked about IoT, the Internet of Things, working together with the blockchain in the food industry. An example I see that you just talked about was maybe the farmer is sending some data about the vegetables that he is transporting out, and it might be information about the health of the soil that they were grown in,
Yeah.
that needs to be reported, but all that can be digitized, and then that data is accessible. It's on there, it's been reported, it's been sensed by the Internet of Things, the sensors that
Right.
are measuring whatever it is that the farmer wants to measure, and then you put that into the system and it's accessible. And like you said, lower cost, because we're not having to figure out which clipboard that is on or which book to look through, and manual labor, a person having to go find that, with the human error involved in that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, for example, there's a bad batch of crops right now. It could take like weeks or months even to like figure out or trace where it's coming from. But if you imagine, if you have all of that data already being fed into the system, you can just trace it back and trail it back through the audit process as to where it's coming from. So it's easier to identify the source of the bad batch of crop and take quicker actions. So one of the great advantages is that you can take quicker business decisions, by having all that data readily available for you, and maybe prevent, further contamination, or, any kind of like disease breakouts or things like that. So that ways it's very helpful in that regard.
Thanks for bringing that up, because that is a big problem when you have either a recall of some sort because there is a problem on the receiving end or somewhere in between,
Yeah,
have to track it back.
yeah.
Or in a lot of countries too, pilferage along the way, along the supply chain. Maybe you're losing some of your initial goods that were sent and they don't end up at the end. But with this way of tracking that, or cataloging where the goods are along the way on the blockchain, then what got transferred where and when, and all the data about it. I think that's a huge strength of this process that you're talking about.
Yeah, and it's also good for inventory management, right? Like if you have freight carriers carrying, goods across the supply chain, so they're maintaining a particular kind of temperature within the freight, so they can report all of that. And if anything goes wrong, like we're using IoT sensors, and if things go wrong with the batch, if the temperature was disturbed, for example, so you have all of that controlled within an environment, and you can take decisions and maybe again recall those products, like because in the world we have seen so many instances where people have died because of these kind of issues. And not just that, it also prevents counterfeiting. Now we are hearing cases of things like olive oil being used in terms of counterfeit goods, like they produce, because it's an expensive product to sell, in the sense that it's widely used across the world. But we are seeing cases of contaminated or counterfeit olive oil, for example. Or there was a case in China in 2008 where there was a breakout that they found melanine, which is a substance that is used for making plastic in baby products, in baby formulas, and as a result, hundreds and thousands of babies died because of that. Now, all of that was being done just for money, right? And it's so sad to see a world where, things are driven just by money, no conscious, and things like that. But now when you have technologies like IoT and, sensor technologies and blockchain, where you can prove that data is coming from an ethical source, your sourcing is organic, for example, you can kind of prevent these instances. I'm not saying it's going to be 100%, because obviously there are leakages in those systems as well. And if we are to go deeper into the technology, there's private and public blockchains. So it depends on how the data is also being validated. But at least now we have some source of that data. We can get into the nitty-gritties of who to hold responsible for such an action. And now we're also, like, from the UN perspective, now we're also talking about SDGs, where we want to meet, the SDGs, make this world a better place, reduce our carbon footprints. So I think technologies like blockchain are also very good for scope 3 emissions, which are nothing but emissions that are coming as a result of, value added chains. So, your supply chain byproducts are creating those emissions, but you as a producer also have to face the brunt of it. And by again having a traceability or transparency of the supply chain, you can also focus on reducing those scope 3 emissions. So it is definitely also very helpful in achieving your emission goals, and being more sustainable and ethical. So these are just some of the examples how blockchain is definitely effective in creating a more circular supply chain.
Yeah, very exciting. Now you brought up the word circular again. That's one that I wanted to go back to from your introduction, because you talked about the circular economy. I wonder if you could share a little bit more about that. Maybe again, define some of those terms for our audience that might not have heard that before. We like to educate as well as inform on Future Foodcast and share what's happening in the latest technologies and the latest trends. So if you could help us with the circular economy, that'd be awesome.
Sure. So basically, what is circular is that you're not having any sort of leakage within the supply chain. And when I say leakages, you are consuming anything very responsibly. And consumption does not come just from the consumer's point of view, but also from a producer's point of view, right? Because when you're a producer, you're also consuming a part of the supply chain to create another product. So you're also a consumer in that sense. So when we talk about circular, it's when we try to minimize the impact of our resources onto the environment. So we try to reduce those leakages, the waste, and we try to redistribute our consumption in a way that we put it back into the system. So we use, for example, recyclable products, recyclable plastics, carbon reducing our carbon emissions and carbon credits. So that is what circular means. It's like a circular economy where everyone holds each other individually responsible for our actions and try to reduce the impact on the environment. And when we talk about blockchain, what happens is that because of the traceability and the immutability and the transparency that it provides, along with other technologies such as IoT and AI, for example, it kind of gives you the tools to achieve that circular economy, to reduce your emissions, whether scope 1, scope 2, scope 3, for example, to kind of measure your footprints as well. Now we're trying to figure out different ways of how we can measure our carbon footprints, how we can reduce our emissions. So these are excellent tools. I'm not saying these are the results, but these are the tools to kind of provide you those solutions to achieve, a circular economy, to make this world a better place, to reduce your environmental impact. Because, we all studied in economics, our wants are unlimited, but resources are definitely limited. So we have to preserve those resources, and we're seeing with climate change, like summer comes in winter, winter comes in summer, snow comes in, summer. I mean, I don't know what's happening, right? But it's also all because of climatic changes. So we need to reduce the impact of these things, and these technologies can help collaborate the impact that we're having on the climate change.
Yeah, and for regular listeners to our show, we have interviewed several companies and organizations that are working in these areas to try to increase our ability to use all of the resources that we have to the best of our ability and not waste food, even on the front end of the production side. What else can be done with those raw materials that aren't used in the manufacturing process? Just like you were talking about, let's try to be good stewards all along the way. And, it makes an impact when some people do a little bit. If everybody does a little bit, it adds up to be a lot and can really
Yeah.
make a big impact. So that's,
Yeah. And I think like now the time is different in the sense where consumers are themselves very conscious, are getting more aware, are more educated about what they're consuming. So, the demand for conscious consumption is being driven by the consumer. So now it's the responsibility of the producers to provide that. And, they're looking for more organically sourced products, more ethically sourced products. So it's also helpful, if you can provide all these kind of certifications onto the blockchain. Consumer can go back and trace whether this company is actually, reliable in terms of when they say they're organic. Are they really organic? Do they have the certificates? Can I trace them? And not just that, it also helps smaller companies, like in like least developed countries or developing countries, to become a part of these global supply chains. If they can attain these certificates and prove as a certificate of origin, for example, that they hold the licenses which are required for exports, in more developed nations, then they can also become an integral part of the global value chain. So it empowers, smaller SMEs also to become a part of the change, which is usually not possible, and the process can take, much longer by getting all these control licenses, export licenses, and permissions and approvals. But now blockchain can make it easier. So, like for example, with LTO, also we work with a technology company called ScanTrust. ScanTrust allows you to scan. They use a barcode, a special barcode, and they allow you to scan the products, which give you a source, a trail of, where the product has been sourced from, and especially in fighting counterfeit goods. So the company definitely focuses on finding counterfeit goods. It could be wine, for example, it could be oil, for example. So you get to know, as a consumer, that what I'm consuming is good for my health or not, for example. Similarly, there are many bigger companies as well who are working on, things like these. So Walmart, for example, Food Trust is one of the big examples. They have been working for a long time in creating a more sustainable and transparent supply chain. And they've also claimed that, if they would have 70% of disputes in their invoices, now they have just 1% of them. So
Wow.
imagine the kind of time that is being saved, and the efficiency that you're seeing within the supply chain itself. Because in the end, everything is a supply chain if you think about it, right? Not just food, but everything that you're dealing with. So yeah, this is how it works, and a lot of companies are working on it, and just interesting to see how the technology is developing to support more of that circular economy.
Well, and this is a lot of the work that you've done with the United Nations, correct? With backing up to the certifications and bringing some of the smaller enterprises into the global operating network to include them, and not only that, verifying so that we as consumers can be confident in the products that we're getting and the sourcing of them, and know that they are certified organic, that they're not fraudulent. Somebody just didn't slip them into the supply chain somewhere along the line, and they're not counterfeit. They are actually what they say they are. And that's important to us. Like you said, consumers are more aware now than they, I think, have been in previous
Yeah,
times, and want to know the sourcing of their products and want to know that it's
yeah.
verified, and have seen the negatives, like you were saying, the case in 2008 where other ingredients might have gotten into the products that we get that can harm us. And we don't want that. And so the technology can help to verify all of those things along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, now is a time when we use more and more of these technologies to kind of, bring that circularity into the system, the food system also. And I feel especially now when we are seeing, wars across the world where we're going to see we saw that in COVID, that there was a disruption in the supply chain. As a result, we saw like inflation imploding, and then cost of living is getting affected. Now we're seeing a phase two where there is some tension, political tension within the Middle East, or Ukraine-Russia war has been going on for a while. So managing supply chains in such instances become even more of the need of an hour, right? Because I mean, we are also interdependent as countries on each other, that if there is a political tension in one part of the world, the rest of the world gets impacted. In this case, in terms of Middle East, it's going to be oil for us, for instance, right? So if you're not prepared in advance, if we do not know or anticipate the future needs, of the supply chain, it could be any domain, not just food. Obviously, food is the biggest part because it's a necessity in times of crisis, especially, right? But if we can kind of anticipate and calculate our needs in advance using AI tools, using blockchain for transparency and IoT to maintain and manage, the existing storage facilities that we have, for example, or the quota of goods we have, it will just help us to move across that crisis better. We'll be better equipped and better prepared for it. So now is even more of a time to use these technologies to kind of prepare ourselves when we are seeing, war looming around the corners. So technology is definitely a way to kind of prepare ourselves for such unfortunate times in the world to come, and food supply chain is definitely a necessity. And yeah, we need to use these tools more and more. I think we need to educate our farmers more and more in terms of how they can use these technologies. We need to have more practical implications, not just theoretical implications of what can blockchain do, what can blockchain not do, but have more of pilots, for example, working with startups in different countries, government supporting those initiatives, working on pilots with them, or having sandboxes to kind of test and try out these technologies in an integrated system to make it more practical and to utilize it not 10 years down the line, but like let's say 2 years down the line, because it is the need of the hour.
Yeah, it is very much so. Thank you for detailing that. And I don't want to skip over the other point that you brought up, which is some of the results of the great work that the technology can provide in the confidence in what's in the supply chain and what's received in, as you referenced, the billing transactions and any kind of disputes that might happen when payment is needing to be made to those that are bringing the supply chain items or the products through the supply chain. Walmart was your example where they were able to drastically reduce disputes to the invoices that were coming through the system.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, like Walmart is just one example. There was one of the biggest examples of blockchain being utilized by a bigger company, which unfortunately does not exist anymore, was TradeLens by IBM and Mars. So, they in fact claimed that 35 million shipping documents were successfully logged onto the platform. And as a result, they saved about 20% in documentation costs, which also reduce their like shipping time by almost 40%. But like unfortunately that did not really go at length with what they expected in terms of like continuing their progression, and they eventually like pulled out from the project. That was for many different reasons, because when you're providing data on the blockchain, even like stakeholders are a bit skeptical about putting their information out there. And when you're talking about companies that large, smaller players could be threatened by having too much control by these larger companies. So there's a lot of network effect that goes on. Maybe that was one of the reasons why TradeLens did not work out, but that's not the point. The point is that it did achieve a massive, milestone while it existed. And maybe they were way ahead in time, and maybe the technology was not that progressed, or consumers or people in general were not ready or aware or educated to kind of adopt blockchain technology. And I mean, we have to accept that it's also like expensive to build. So you cannot expect, companies to replace their legacy systems. We need to find a hybrid solution where you can plug blockchain technology onto their systems. And if you can do that, if you can provide cheaper solutions for that, then it becomes easier to integrate. But the benefits are readily out there. There is a proof that this can definitely make you achieve better efficiencies within the supply chain. It can reduce your invoicing costs, it can reduce your permissions that are needed, and you can use that through smart contracts. You can have automated smart contracts in place, which, let's say, upon goods being received, they can receive automated payments, by the supplier, for example. So there are many examples of how smart contracts can be helpful. But yeah, this is the way that, blockchain can definitely help. But having said that, I don't want to sound all pro blockchain, because I know, there are limitations as well. So it's also important to address why it has not been able to achieve that kind of success. We've existed, like blockchain existed since 2009 on paper, but we have not been able to achieve those kind of success metrics that we should have achieved by now. But I think technologists need to come together, policymakers need to come together, bigger companies need to come together. Firstly, to educate people about the benefits of it. Secondly, have trainings across different stakeholders to make them understand how it's going to be helpful to them and how they can implement it. Like provide a faster, cheaper solution to integrate, blockchain systems into the existing legacy systems. And at the same time, you need to have like easier UXs and user interfaces for people to use blockchain technology. So I mean, I should be able to use an app which is running blockchain at the back of it, but I as a consumer do not know that I'm using blockchain. If we can achieve that kind of like user friendliness, then that is a point where we can say that blockchain has been successful in penetrating the masses.
Yes, I think all good points. And the conversation is increasing, Pankhuri, as the technology is improving at an exponential rate. and the applications are expanding at similar rates. I mean, the adoption is just picking up. To your point of maybe the other situation, they tried too early, there wasn't enough education, because a lot of people are still concerned, and when they had a bad early experience with some kind of technology, they're hesitant to look into adopting other technologies moving forward. But I think that is changing. At least that's what I'm hearing here at Future Foodcast from the different people that we interview, that they are more open. They realize technology, there are a lot of gains to be had. There are challenges to be overcome. And that's a great point to bring up. But if everybody can come to the table and have the conversation, then you can figure out how to move forward and overcome some of those challenges.
Yes, absolutely. I think the narrative is changing around blockchain. Initially, the association to blockchain was unfortunately only cryptocurrencies. And, because of scams and people losing their money and, major ICOs failing, for example, back in the day, I think, unfortunately, people started associating blockchain to cryptocurrencies, but that's not the case. As you rightly mentioned at the start of our conversation, that crypto is just one use case of blockchain. But blockchain is the technology, the underlying technology, like how we talk about AI as a technology and ChatGPT being just one tool to use AI, right? So similarly, blockchain is a technology and cryptocurrency is just one use case of it. Like that, you can use blockchain for various use cases within food, pharma, finance, you name it, and you can use it. And now people are being more and more aware of it, and people understand the benefits of using the technology. They're also seeing practically how it's helping different industries and how it can help within their industries as well. And what's important is that there's a dialogue now among different industry experts to provide those solutions at the government levels as well. So the government is also consulting experts who are experts within the technological innovation space to form to form policies based on their opinion. So it's more like practically guided policy making, which is going to help and drive the innovation forward.
Well, I'm very happy that there are people with your intellect who are helping to lead the charge with the technology, especially at the levels that you're able to operate, and bringing some of the stakeholders together to have good conversations around these topics to help everybody move faster. As you were saying, sooner rather than later. It doesn't need to be, we don't have 10 years down the line to wait. We need to implement some of these technologies now. It takes a little while to transition things, and so we need to get started. Is there anything else you would like to share with our audience before we go? I really appreciate just all that you've shared with us today, because it helps to open up our minds to what's actually possible moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think another thing that I would like to mention is that I'm working like with ISO and UN on creating blockchain standards or AI standards. And why I personally believe standardization is very important is because it provides a framework. People are lost right now that, one stakeholder wants to use blockchain, the other person also does want to use blockchain, but they don't know how to talk to each other. And that's where standards come in place, where you know that, okay, I've been given a standard, I've been given a format that I need to record my data in a certain way, and I know if the other party also records it in the similar fashion, then my data can talk to your data and we can make like decisions based on that in a coherent manner. We don't need to spend time in understanding each other's data. Now multiply that into, let's say, 100 stakeholders involved within the supply chain. So that just makes the processes faster and more efficient in terms of talking to each other, which is essentially called interoperability into DLT systems or any kind of technological solutions. And we're working very hard on creating those standards and publishing those standards, which works as an industry framework to adopt and adapt blockchain and AI more and more, for example. So I would like to just end on a note that standards are very important, and it's important that we focus on those standards and we use these standards more and more, because it just makes it easier for your business to deal with your suppliers or your different stakeholders and benefit from these technologies. But yeah, I would just like to add and end on a note that definitely like these technological solutions are the need of the hour, and food forms a critical part of the supply chain. And if we can utilize and optimize the benefits of these technologies into the food supply chain, it's not just good, in terms of sustainability, but also empowering, smaller stakeholders such as your farmers, for example. It will empower them. And as a result, it's going to also uplift people within the economy. And as a result, we can also formulate a circular economy and maybe hopefully have lesser impact on the climate as well.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. Thanks a lot.
And to our audience, thank you for being here. And if you'd like to comment on this episode, we would love to have a conversation around technology and its implication in the food industry. Please comment. And if you don't want to miss the next show, please subscribe. Until then, I'm Pam Line-Miller.
Thanks for listening to Future Foodcast. Future Foodcast is powered by Farm to Plate, the leading food blockchain platform. Subscribe on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts to stay up to date with the very latest innovations in the food industry.